The founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and what followed, the Great Puritan Migration, had a huge impact on the development of America. In fact, it's fair to say that this was the most significant colonial venture up to this point in time. This is partly because of the sheer number of Puritans that moved to New England over a fairly short period of time, but it's also because of the impact that they would have on the development of American society, culture, and politics. In this video, we are going to look at both the founding of the colony and the reasons why so many people decided to leave England and move to this new Puritan state in the wilderness of North America. Let's get started. The Puritans were a reform movement within the Church of England. They wanted to see the church purified of what they saw as remnants of Catholicism. In particular, they wanted to see the Book of Common Prayer removed from worship services and replaced with readings from Scripture, and they wanted to remove bishops from the church altogether, and instead have the local congregation oversee their own affairs. King James I was not open to these reforms, however, and so the Puritans became a persecuted minority in England. While there were certainly some wealthy Puritans like the well-to-do merchant John Winthrop, who would become the colony's first governor, for the most part Puritans were just ordinary men and women artisans and laborers seeking to practice their religion freely. Given that the Puritans were an ordinary folk, it's no surprise that when they came to America they wanted to build a community based on the values and principles that were important to them. As mentioned before, the chief value of the Puritans was the practice of their religion free from persecution. But they also believed in hard work, education, frugality, self-discipline, family, and community. From the start, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was organized as a theocracy. That is to say that civil and criminal law were intertwined with religious doctrine. The colony was run by a group of elders and deacons, all of whom had to be members of the Puritan Church, and all major decisions had to be made with the entire male membership of the church. Non-Puritans were allowed to live in the colony but could not vote or participate in any way in the government. The other thing that the Puritans brought with them to New England was a strong emphasis on literacy and education. Part of this was due to the nature of their religious beliefs. As mentioned before, the Puritans placed great importance on readings from Scripture during worship services, and the only way that this could take place was if the congregation was literate, and so from the very beginning, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was dedicated to building schools to educate the children of the colony. By 1640, every town with more than 50 families was required by law to establish a school. This ensured that every child, boy or girl, rich or poor, could receive an education. This emphasis on education was a big deal, and would go on to have a major impact on the development of American intellectual life. For example, one of the first major acts of the General Court of the colony was to establish Harvard College in 1636. This was done with a donation from John Harvard, who left his estate, including his library, to the fledgling institution. Originally, the school was intended to train Puritan ministers, but over time, its curriculum broadened, and by the end of the century, it was on par with many English universities. The success of Harvard led to the establishment of several other notable institutions, including Yale in 1701, Princeton in 1746, and Columbia in 1754. Finally, the last thing that needs to be said about the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the people that settled it is that while they sought to escape persecution in England, they did not want to simply flee to a new land and hide away. Instead, they wanted to build a new kind of society in New England. This is beautifully captured in a sermon given by John Winthrop aboard the ship that carried him and his fellow Puritans across the Atlantic. In it, he talks about how the Puritans were establishing a city upon a hill, a beacon of virtue and piety for all the world to see. Now, this may sound like a strange thing to say, but it really captures the spirit of the Puritan migration and the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. These were people who wanted to build something new, not simply escape the old. And that desire to build something new would continue to characterize American life long after the Puritans were gone. Now, as we turn our attention to the Great Puritan Migration, it's important to remember that the initial settlement at Massachusetts Bay was quite as smooth as we might imagine. It's true that the Puritans enjoyed a brief moment of prosperity in the early years, but after that, things got pretty rough. For the first 3 years, the colony barely clung to life. Harsh weather, disease, starvation, and attacks from Native Americans took a heavy toll on the settlers. Even as they pushed forward, however, the Puritans never lost sight of their vision for the colony, and this kept them going through the tough times. By the mid-1630s, the colony was growing rapidly, and it was clear that Boston was becoming too crowded. This led to the establishment of new settlements along the coast and inland. But as the colony grew, so too did the tensions with the Native Americans. In 1636, the Pequot War broke out when English settlers encroached on Native American lands. The war ended with the near-total destruction of the Pequot tribe, and the English emerged victorious. This victory emboldened the Puritans, and they began to push westward even further. This caused more conflicts with the tribes living there, which led to the first of the Great Puritan Migration. The first Great Migration took place in the mid-1630s, and was triggered by the desire for more land and the need to defend the colony against the Dutch and French. Over 20,000 Puritans arrived in New England between 1630 and 1642. The majority of these migrants came directly from England, although some came from other colonies as well. What's interesting about this migration is that it was not a sudden mass movement, but rather a steady stream of settlers over the course of 12 years. This was made possible by the economic success of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. As the colony grew, it became increasingly prosperous, and this prosperity attracted even more Puritans to come and settle in New England. However, by the 1640s, things were changing. England had entered into a civil war between the Parliamentarians and the Royalists, with Oliver Cromwell at the helm, and the Puritans in Massachusetts found themselves caught in the middle. With ties to both England and New England, many Puritans began to fear that the colony might be attacked by either side. This led to the Second Great Migration, which took place in the mid-1640s. During this time, thousands of Puritans fled to New England to escape the violence and upheaval in England. Many of them had been members of Parliament, and they brought with them a wealth of knowledge and experience that helped to shape the colony's future. The third and final Great Migration took place in the 1650s and 1660s. By this point, the English Civil War had come to an end, and Oliver Cromwell had emerged victorious. However, his rule was unpopular in Massachusetts Bay Colony, and many Puritans fled to New England to escape his authority. All told, the Great Puritan Migration saw about 70,000 Puritans arrive in New England over the course of 3 decades. This massive influx of people transformed the demographics of the region and had a profound impact on its history. To put it simply, without the Great Puritan Migration, New England would be a very different place today. It's also worth noting that the story of the Puritan migration is ultimately a tragic one. While the Puritans were successful in establishing a colony in New England, they were not successful in creating a society based on their values and principles. In fact, the Puritans were notorious for their intolerance of other religions and their persecution of those who did not conform to their beliefs. Furthermore, the Puritans' desire for land and resources led to the displacement and massacre of Native Americans. And finally, the Puritans' commitment to traditional gender roles and their opposition to women's rights would have a lasting impact on American society for centuries to come. Still, the Puritan legacy is a complicated one. On the one hand, they were responsible for some of the darkest chapters in American history. On the other hand, they were also responsible for some of the most important developments in American culture and society. Ultimately, it is up to each individual American to decide how they feel about the Puritan legacy. Thanks for watching.